The turkey had been on the table for maybe 7 minutes when my mother pushed back her chair. Not to get more gravy, not to check on the rolls she always burns and always blames on the oven. She pushed it back slowly, with both hands flat on the tablecloth, the way she does when she wants the room to notice her before she speaks. I've watched her do it my entire life. At school plays, at my sister's wedding, at my father's retirement dinner. My mother does not simply stand. She rises. 30 people were packed into my parents' dining room and the overflow table they set up in the living room every November. Aunts and uncles, cousins with their spouses. My grandmother, 81, who hadn't spoken above a whisper since her hip replacement. My brother Marcus and his wife Diane, who had driven down from Portland. And me, Claire, 34 years old, sitting at what my family has called, without irony, the grown-up table since I was approximately 8. "I need to say something," my mother said. The table went quiet the way tables do when adults sense a confrontation but haven't identified the target yet. Forks stilled. Someone's child asked a question and was quietly shushed. "We're missing Grandma Sylvie Quote's ring." My grandmother looked up from her plate. "The diamond one," my mother continued, "that she gave me to hold after her surgery. The one she said was meant to stay in this family." She paused. "We found the jewelry box on Claire Quote's old dresser, empty." Every head at that table turned toward me. I remember the exact sensation of it. Not the heat I expected, not the flooding shame. Just the strange stillness of being watched by 30 people who are trying to decide something about you, and knowing that most of them have already decided. I looked at my mother. I said, "Okay." She blinked. She had prepared for defensiveness, for tears, for a denial she could publicly dismantle. Okay was not on her script. "That's all you have to say." "For now," I said, and I reached down beside my chair and picked up the manila envelope I had carried in with me and set it on the table next to my plate, where it had sat, unremarked upon, for the last 40 minutes. Let me tell you what people do when a family member is publicly accused. They do not, as you might hope, withhold judgment. They do not say, "Let's hear her out." What they do is recalibrate. They run a silent calculation. How close am I to this person? How much do I trust the accuser? What is the cost of being wrong on either side? And they choose the safer ledge. My parents have lived in this town for 40 years. My father coaches the youth baseball league. My mother sits on the church fundraising committee. I moved to Seattle 11 years ago. Within about 90 seconds, I watched my Aunt Patris put down her wine glass and fold her hands in her lap, which is what she does when she has formed an opinion and is waiting to deliver it. I watched my cousin Devin look at his phone, which is what Devin does when he wants to pretend a situation isn't happening. I watched my brother Marcus look at his wife Diane, and Diane look at her plate, which told me everything I needed to know about what Marcus had told his wife about me over the years, filtered through whatever version of me my parents had been quietly distributing at family events I had not attended. My father cleared his throat. "We're not trying to cause trouble, Claire. We just need to understand what happened." This is the language my father has used my entire life for the process of publicly putting me on trial. "We're not trying to cause trouble." He said it when I was 16 and accused of taking money from his wallet, money my brother had taken. He said it when I was 22 and accused of lying about my job at the time. I hadn't been lying, but the truth was less impressive than what my sister had told people, so it registered as a lie. My father does not cause trouble. He simply asks questions in front of an audience until the social pressure creates the confession he wants. "Of course," I said, "take your time." My grandmother, Sylvie herself, was watching me carefully from the far end of the table. She was the only one who had not shifted. She had the expression of someone who has seen this performance before and is watching for something specific in the staging. The ring had gone missing, supposedly, sometime in the last 3 weeks. My parents had been looking after several of Grandma Sylvie Quote's smaller valuables since her surgery, a practical arrangement, her house being on the far side of town and her mobility limited. I had visited my parents 2 weekends ago alone, while Marcus and his family were at a soccer tournament. I had stayed one night. This, I understood, was the geometry of the accusation. Motive, opportunity, and a family history of positioning me as the unreliable one. What I knew, and what no one at that table knew I knew, was that the ring had not been on the dresser 3 weeks ago. I knew this because I had not gone near that dresser. I knew this because the Sunday before my visit, my mother had called me to ask whether I could look in on a few things in the guest room while I was there, an odd request I hadn't thought much about at the time, but had thought about considerably since. And I knew this because 6 days ago, I had received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize, and the woman on the other end had introduced herself as a solicitor handling a property matter for a client whose name she wasn't at liberty to share. She needed, she said, to confirm whether I had any knowledge of certain items that had recently been moved between family members. I had asked her to send me everything in writing. The envelope had arrived on Thursday morning. I had opened it, read it twice, and driven 4 hours to Thanksgiving dinner. The jewelry box was found in the guest room, my mother was saying now, expanding her account for the room. In the dresser. Claire was the only one who stayed in that room recently. Was I said. Silence. Was I the only one who stayed in that room? My mother's jaw tightened slightly. That's not the point. I think it might be the point, I said. My Aunt Patris had unfolded her hands. My cousin Devin had put his phone face down. At the children's table in the living room, someone dropped a fork and a small voice said asterisk asterisk, and no adult responded. Claire, my father's voice had taken on the patient, pained tone of a man who is being forced, very reluctantly, to be reasonable at great personal cost. No one is saying this is definitely what happened. We're just asking. You called me a thief, I said, not loudly. In front of 30 people before dessert at Thanksgiving. That is what you said. That's what everyone in this room heard. I let that sit for a moment. I'm happy to answer questions. I just want us to agree on what the question actually is. My mother's eyes moved to the envelope. She had been looking at it, I noticed, with increasing frequency since I'd set it on the table. She didn't know what was in it, but she was beginning to understand that I had brought it deliberately and that it had something to do with this moment. What is that? She asked. I'll get to it, I said. My grandmother spoke for the first time. Patricia, that was my mother's name. My grandmother only used it when she meant to be heard. Sit down. The table shifted. My grandmother's authority was one of the few social forces in that room that operated independently of my parents. Claire, Grandma Sylvie said. She looked at me directly, the way she always had, without the performance of concern or disappointment that everyone else in my family treated as a substitute for actually paying attention. You came prepared. I did, I said. Then let's hear it. I picked up the envelope. I had not taped it shut. I had wanted to be able to open it cleanly, without tearing, without fumbling. I slid out the papers and set them on the table. 6 days ago, I said, I received a letter from a solicitor named Helen Marsh, acting on behalf of a client I now believe to be Uncle Robert, my father's brother, who was not at this dinner, who had not been invited to family events, to my knowledge, for approximately 2 years. The letter was a formal inquiry regarding the disposition of several items of jewelry that belonged to Grandma Sylvie, items that, according to a document Grandma Sylvie signed last March, were to be transferred to her estate upon her death, not given away during her lifetime. The silence was a different quality now, denser. Included in this inquiry, I continued, was a notice that the family property, this house, has been placed as collateral against a loan taken out 8 months ago. I kept my voice even. I was not performing calm. I was calm. I had been calm since Thursday morning, which is what happens when you have been waiting your whole life for the geometry of a situation to finally become visible. The jewelry, according to M.S. Marsh, was likely moved in an attempt to liquidate assets that are technically subject to estate protections. I slid one page to the center of the table. The ring didn't go missing, I said. It was sold. I don't know who has it now, but I know it wasn't me. What happened next did not look like what people imagine when they imagine a revelation. There was no shouting. My father did not overturn his chair. My mother did not cry, not yet, not in the room. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways more complete. My father looked at the page in the center of the table for a long moment. Then he looked at my mother. The look between them lasted only a second, but it was the kind of second that contains an entire conversation. The shorthand of two people who have managed a shared secret and are now, simultaneously, recalibrating what the other one knows. My Aunt Patris picked up the page. "Dave," she said, my father's name, her voice was very quiet. "Is this real?" He didn't answer. My grandmother had both hands flat on the tablecloth. She was not looking at my parents. She was looking at me, and she nodded once very slowly in the way someone nods when they have suspected something for a long time and have finally been given the shape of it. Around the table, I watched people do the thing people do when they realize they have been recruited, without their knowledge, to enforce someone else's lie. My cousin Devin picked up his phone and then put it back down without looking at it. My brother Marcus had gone very still. His wife Diane was looking at her plate again, but differently now. Not with the studied neutrality of someone staying out of it, but with the particular stillness of someone who has heard a version of a family story for years and is only now noticing the seams. My mother said, "You don't understand the full situation." "I don't need to," I said. "I'm not here to explain your finances. I'm here because you called me a thief at your Thanksgiving table." I gathered the papers and slid them back into the envelope. I just wanted everyone to know that I wasn't one. I set the envelope back beside my plate. I picked up my fork. I ate my Thanksgiving dinner. No one asked me to leave. No one asked my parents to leave, either, which I had half expected and half dreaded. What happened instead was that the dinner continued, the way family dinners do, because the alternative, acknowledgement, confrontation, the actual processing of what had just occurred, was too large and too costly for a room full of people holding wine glasses and paper napkins printed with autumn leaves. But the tenor of the room had changed in the way a room changes when something true has been said in it. Conversations were shorter. The children's table in the living room remained louder than the adults, which was unusual. My Aunt Patris did not refill her wine. My father ate his turkey and said nothing. My mother spoke once about the weather, and nobody picked it up. My grandmother, as the plates were being cleared, reached across and touched my hand. "You could have told me," she said quietly. "I know," I said. "I wanted you to see it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded again and let go of my hand. I helped carry dishes to the kitchen. I said goodbye to cousins. I hugged my grandmother carefully, the way you hug someone whose hip is still healing. I drove home in the dark with the heat on and the radio off, and I felt something I hadn't felt at my parents' house in a very long time, which was the specific and uncomplicated sensation of having told the truth in the right room at the right moment. I hadn't taken anything. I just returned something that had been taken from me. That was enough.